Hello and welcome to our Q&A for the film Chosen with director Joseph Jun. Thank you, Joseph, for sharing with us your time. We really enjoyed this film and we chose it for many reasons, but I just wanted to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the why behind your film.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Connecting from Korea. I'm otherwise based in New York City. It would have been lovely to be there with you, but the film that you guys just watched, Chosen, opened in theaters in Korea just a couple of days ago. Um, Not a good timing because it's a national mourning period in light of what happened in Itaewon last week. Uh, so it's hurting us in terms of box office, but what can we do, right? I'm leaving it up to the man up there and see how it turns out. I hope a lot of Korean audience would find the film as a way to give themselves a reason to continue to march on and move forward. As to why I started Chosen, I started wondering as someone who has a vested interest in the Korean peace process as a Korean American. I read John Bolton's expose, which is called The Room Where It Happened. And John Bolton, as you might remember, is a Trump security advisor. And he basically talks about why the Hanoi summit between Kim Jong-un and Trump failed, um, and why the peace process stopped after that one summit. He basically says the peace process in Korea failed as a result of three people's impulsive decision, Pompeo, Bolton, and Trump himself. And when I read those lines, I thought to myself, what if those positions were occupied by Korean Americans? So that's where my hypothesis began, and that's around the time when I read a newspaper saying there are 5 Korean Americans running for office, and
Yes.
I thought maybe they're the solution. Let me follow them around. Yeah.
It was very well done. We haven't seen a story like this, just about the lives of the representatives and their stories. Um, that was just, we need more representation, and we had earlier today just talking about it with local representatives and supporters for the AAPI community as well. Tell us a little bit about how you went about with your process of finding the representatives and developing your story around David Kim.
So before I was a storyteller, I was also a practicing attorney,
Mhm.
and that's that's how I knew David Kim. We invited David Kim on a number of occasions to for him to talk about entertainment law. He was actually quite a well-known entertainment lawyer
Mm.
before he became immigration and labor lawyer. Um, so I was acquainted with David Kim, and I asked him when I saw the newspaper, "Hey, David, can I just follow you around for the next 4 months leading up to the election?" And David says, "Anytime." So out of the five, I had the most amount of footage on David Kim.
Mhm.
Other candidates were slightly more reluctant. One, because it was at the height of the pandemic.
Mhm.
Two, because they didn't know me or what my intentions were.
Mhm.
But I did pull a lot of strings and try to get through the closest friends of theirs to ultimately sit down with them for a few hours. And some of them gave me more access than just one. So there are two reasons as to why David Kim became the protagonist. One being the pragmatic reasons of I had unlimited footage of David, like 150, 200 hours.
Mm.
So there was imbalance of sort of footage in terms of how we can construct story. But more substantively, David himself alone signifies so much of different tension points that exist within our community, right?
Oh, yeah.
Ellis, you just mentioned the need for API, Korean American representation in the political arena. But I also happen to believe, in addition to, calling out for the need for political representation is, um, that we need to take a hard look at ourselves internally and see what are some of the issues that are taboo around dinner table that we don't
Mm,
often talk about, whether it's generational gap, ideological gap, the very conservative sort of first generation's perception on the LGBTQ community,
mm,
the race relations, LA rights. I mean, you mentioned,
Oh, yes.
yeah, David Kim alone was a character that can bring out all those pain points.
Very, very, and very well done. I do wanna know, you hit a core with the Korean community, with David Kim's story because of the many pain points that he has brought out, and I'm curious to know what the, response was from his family when you showed the film to them. I've been dying to ask you. I was so pleased that you were able to do this time,
Mm,
and I'm
mm,
dying to know what the
mm.
response was.
Oh my God, it's a roller coaster to be honest with Alice.
Mm,
And to be honest with you, I think there will be some kind of closure will take place next Tuesday
mm,
after when the midterm election takes place, because I think a lot hinges on whether David can win. I think if he wins, the parents might be able to um, overcome some of the discomfort that they felt by watching the film. So there are multiple closures. I think, one closure happens and I think, okay, this must be a Hollywood happy ending because
mm,
there was a time when David Kim's parents just 3 months ago came down to LA and David's dad had a change of heart during his prayers. And
mm,
when David's brother, Evan, presented multiple scientific report and evidence in the animal kingdom, where there's over 1,000 same-sex attraction, David's dad started YouTubing, Wikipedia, and Googling, and seeing whether there has indeed been some sort of traceable track of same-sex attraction across animal kingdom and in
mm.
human world. He came to his own conclusion that because he's, evangelical pastor,
Yes, yes.
he believes there's no mistake in God's world. And
Mm,
I'm quoting everything from David's own
yes,
words,
yes.
uh, that his son must not be a byproduct of God's mistake, but he was born that way. And when he came to that conclusion, he sincerely apologized to David, and I'm just gonna try to put it poetically, but the two had a reunion in one of the Korean restaurants in Koreatown, and they wept for hours, like embracing each other, right?
Wow,
And when I heard that from David a few months ago, I thought, okay, this is more dramatic than a Hollywood ending, right?
absolutely. Oh,
But
wow.
that wasn't unfortunately the case. It persisted. He went back and forth, David's father, in terms of where he stands, and in terms of his endorsement of the storytelling. Yeah.
Mhm. Thank
So
you.
it's ongoing. It's ongoing.
Yeah,
Mm,
absolutely.
mm,
It's live. It's great. I mean, it was really well done. Um, yeah, I'd like to hear a little bit more about the story around Michelle Park Steele
mm.
and how you told that story.
Do you have a liberal audience?
Well, I'm just again, many reasons why I chose this and put this on up here as well as, our community here
Mm,
was the representations of the different dialogues and the backgrounds, and why do you like, it was just beautifully done. It really
mm,
was, Joseph. I mean, audiences, I'm so glad they can see it in Korea, but I don't know if they'll see those nuances that we see here in the American audiences,
right,
and
right.
being an Asian American and understanding the behaviors behind it, or so,
Mm,
it was just, again, well done, the
mm.
different perspectives.
I think you're absolutely right, Alice. Last night, in fact, I went to one of the theaters with a couple of my friends just to see audience's reaction,
Yeah.
and a lot of nuance gets lost, right?
Mm. Mhm.
I don't think they quite understand the fear and the concern of MAGA hat wearing
Mm,
young kids around Michelle's office chanting USA,
mm,
um, what kind of violent rhetoric that we as Asian Americans feel. And but rather, they took that as, oh wow, this Korean woman is being embraced and cheered on by these uh, white kids, and she must be really popular. So I think a lot of my intention is misconstrued here, but
mhm,
nevertheless, those who are interested in and plug into the U.S. politics, I think get some sense that what they're seeing is it's concerning to a certain degree. In terms of the coverage of Michelle or even Young,
mm,
one of
mm,
the guiding principles of making Chosen was actually one of fairness.
mm.
And I really earnestly try to humanize every
Yes,
character,
absolutely. Mm,
irrespective where they fall on the political spectrum,
mhm,
because the whole point of making Chosen was to really question what it means to coexist peacefully amidst our differences. So the last thing I wanted to see is there being further division after people watching Chosen. And, I had a lot of mixed sort of reception to each character, depending on which region in the US I play this film. For
yeah,
instance, playing it in New York City versus Atlanta, I had a completely different reactions. Yeah,
right, right,
yeah.
right. I'm sure. So the interesting part that we also saw out of this is that all your candidates were Korean American, and I know being a
Mm,
Korean American yourself, that was significant. We also looked at the data as far as just Asian Americans, other Asian Americans being representative in politics, and
mm,
it's very few. You
mm,
know, it's very few. And my a question from this morning, but also wanted to address to you as well is what are your thoughts about the representation of Asian Americans in U.S. politics?
mm. So one of the anchor points of Chosen is 1992 civil uprising,
Mm,
LA riot. A lot of Koreans call it LA riots,
mhm,
and to find a more neutral term, we call it 사이구,
mm,
which indicates the date on
okay,
which the riots took place. And at the time, 1992, April 29, there is not a single elected Korean American across the entire country, right? Not in a city level, state
mm,
level, or federal level. I think that spoke volume because no one was able to represent our voice. There was no one that could express the concerns of our community and why we're being attacked, and none of the police force were coming. And so Angela Oh, as was briefly appear in the film, was the only person who was able to do that in the mainstream, right,
mhm,
media. Now let's fast forward 30 years. A whole generation has passed.
mm,
And I think, in a way, we are facing our generation's Saigo,
mm,
LA Riot Civil Uprising, in light of the anti-hate crimes against the API committee. And do we have more representatives in politics? Yes, we do, but not enough, right? Not enough to the point where we are still being considered as perpetual foreigner. I think we're still struggling with model minority myth. Um, and one of the best ways to sort of continue to overcome such stereotype is to produce more API leadership who represents our community's values, right? I think the more complex question is when what happens if some of these API leaders are elected and yet they happen to side with uh, with the I'd say hard right wing
mhm,
yeah sphere of politics where the AAPI hate crimes are condoned, right?
mhm, mhm,
Um, then what do we do? Then what does it mean to produce many leaders from API communities, even if they don't necessarily reflect the concerns and fear that we have, right, as a community?
Right, right.
I think that's an interesting question, and I don't know how to answer that, to be honest with you.
No, that's okay. It was we talked about it for quite some time, and it's
Yeah.
you bring that was the dynamic of your film, was that it
Mm,
showed both of that, and how do you rectify that and become peaceful with that, and, we
mm,
came up with ways to address some of the insignificance or inconsistencies, actually. So,
mm,
um,
mm. Right.
through education, um, building relationships, which all takes time,
Mm, mm,
um, and trying to support the community that way. But you're right, the anchor point was the LA riots, and that's what became known
mm.
and still is.
It
Yeah.
is. Yes,
Mhm.
you're right. I think the whole issues surrounding race relations, especially within the Korean American community, which where immigrant families generally start out from like a small church setting, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And thereby, I think perhaps disproportionately, I think there are a lot more numbers of evangelical Christian population within the Korean American community as opposed to other AAPI communities, and that generally tends to correlate with their political views as well, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So yeah, if you go talk to the first generation Korean immigrant families, the chances are, they're Christians, and their worldview tends to be in line with that of the GOP
Mhm. Mhm.
perspective, and yeah, but the second generation is probably the opposite, right?
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
they've experienced firsthand what it means to be ethnic minority and all that. So how do we bridge that gap? Has
Mhm.
been a challenge.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, Joseph, your bio for the film of why you ended up doing this, can you tell us a little bit about your,
Mm,
meeting? Was it in Cuba or what?
yeah. Mm, sure. So yeah, I was just average Joe, practicing law at a government agency in New York, and in 2015, end of year, I decided to go on a backpacking trip to Cuba. And first Cuban I meet outside of the airport, who was supposed to drive me to the hostel I booked, happened to be an Asian woman. First Cuban I meet is Asian woman. So, probability wise, there's more Chinese around the world than Koreans. I thought,
Mhm.
oh, are you of Chinese descent? And she says, no, I'm fourth generation Korean Cuban. And my grandpa was sold as a slave 100 years ago. And
Mm.
my dad fought in the Cuban Revolution with Fidel and Che. And I said, what? What did you just tell me? So yeah, that literally changed the course of my life, because I, for one, is someone who's always been interested in this idea of Korean diaspora,
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
and how do we internalize a diasporic identity? What does it mean to live outside of our motherland as ethnic American?
Mm.
Uh, I don't think, there are too many people that have figured this out. I mean, now it's kind of cool being Korean, but even when I was growing up, going to high school, it was never cool being Korean, right? Now
Yeah.
if anything, yeah, if anything, we try to assimilate more, try to
Mhm.
not to speak Korean, not to associate anything that we had to do with our mother culture. So this idea of having dual identity, multi identities, and how do we make sense of that,
Yeah.
was always a big question. And meeting Korean Cubans really helped me resolve a lot of those identity issues that I struggled with. So I never intend to become a filmmaker. It was just more like, oh, let me go back to Cuba and make a 20-minute YouTube clip on Korean Cubans. But little did I know that became a 3-year documentary journey, and now I'm on my second film. So
That's wonderful. No, that's a great story, Joseph. You should definitely tell that. So, what is your next project as we get down to our 10 minutes here? Mhm.
Mm. Well, there are a few ideas that I have in mind, but nothing I put into execution.
Mhm.
I've been just kind of half seriously telling a lot of my Korean friends here that, whether I'm going to make third film really depends on the theatrical success here in Korea. But that's so far doesn't seem to be the case. So, but let's say, someone gives me a grant money and I can work on my third film. I met
Mm,
a Korean American doctor who works in North Korea.
mm.
He's
Oh,
been there for the past 13 years treating kids with disabilities, right?
mhm,
And he runs a 8 weeks therapy course during which he witnesses this great sort of restoration of relationship between the kids and their parents. And he tells me that through witnessing these restoration, he sees the restoration of the Korean Peninsula, right?
mm,
And once he mentioned that, I thought to myself, wow, I mean, this will be a great sort of diasporic trilogy
mhm.
if I may, and I would love to work on this film if I can. Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank
Mhm.
you. Thank you very much. So, I think this ends our time because you only
Mhm.
had, the time that you gave us, and we appreciate you for what you've put out there, and we hope you continue to do more films.
Thank you, Alice. Thanks for leading this moderating. Thank you.
Absolutely.